So, there's this interesting scene in the film Fight Club that raises a good question. Tyler Durden is this hyper-confident, unrestrained character who in one scene grabs a shopkeeper named Raymond and takes him out the back on his knees with a revolver to his head. He discovers Raymond went to college and asks him what he wanted to be, which was a veterinarian. Crucially, he also tells Raymond he's about to lose his life. So Raymond thinks it's over, but then, actually, Tyler lets him go free, however keeps Raymond's ID and tells him he's going to check in again. If Raymond isn't on his way to becoming a vet in 6 weeks, then he will die. It's quite a shocking moment. Brilliantly filmed to convey Raymond's distress, but also a sense of power from Tyler that can almost seem intoxicating. The moral conscience of Ed Norton's character is kept at a bit of a distance, and when he asks Tyler what the point of any of that was, he explains,
"Tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Raymond Chaos's life. His breakfast will taste better than any meal you and I have ever tasted."
Raymond had a near-death experience, feeling he was about to die with all of his dreams and potential unfulfilled, and so therefore being given a second chance will motivate Raymond to really go for it and finally live the life he always wanted to live. He will, in the end, be thankful to Tyler. And the logic kind of makes sense. As the film puts it, it made sense in a Tyler Durden sort of way, but is that really true? Would Raymond's breakfast next morning really taste like the best meal of his entire life? For me, the answer is an obvious no. I think at the absolute best, it might give you the necessary motivation to then actually become a vet like you did always want. However, it'd still feel less like your own achievement out of your own ability than something you were just forced to do. And it would probably turn what was your passion into a symbol of fear and shame for you. If you were thankful to Tyler Durden for that, I think it'd be more out of the eagerness for the trauma to have meant something positive than the reality here. You might just as easily break down under the pressure and then fail to become a vet. You might not even try. You would most definitely be traumatized. We could pull in whatever criticisms here about tough love that I have done in the past, but really I don't think the debate about whether or not this would actually work is the important question here. I think there's a much bigger point to do with Raymond that gets to the heart of what this film is really all about. And I think it's a good point that I'm excited to make this video for, but it's naturally a point that starts with Ed Norton's character, the narrator. So let's have an introduction and then let's get going. Like a lot of people, I first watched this film when I was, I think, 16, and it immediately became my favourite movie. It sticks with you, and it took me a while to understand why that was, but I did know from the beginning I was gripped initially, because it spoke to some of my own discontentment and frustration, or at the very least I thought A Fight Club looked really appealing. This is a film where Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt, asks the unnamed narrator, played by Ed Norton, to punch him as hard as he can.
Mother.
They fight, and it breaks down their barriers. It feels alive, it's an outlet. They start doing it every Saturday, and then other men think it looks appealing and ask for their turn fighting, and it builds into a much bigger underground club. It is obviously a mistake to idealise Tyler Durden the way a lot of people still do, but that doesn't mean we should ignore the powerful appeal in all of this. I went away at 16 and wanted to form a fight club. I had fights with my friends. I think it was one of the motivations that first got me into boxing. Of course, you could analyse this film from the context of self-harm. The fact, spoilers, I do need to spoil the big twist of this film at some point during this video, so I might as well do it now. You'd be better off clicking away if you don't want to hear that now, okay? Tyler and the narrator are actually the same person. So this fight club is literally started by the narrator beating himself up, and it all builds to end with the extreme of shooting himself through the cheek. Alternatively, you could just see the catharsis of getting to destroy, to express more primal instincts, to release aggression and rage. You know, I'm a children's counsellor. I've had sessions before with kids who told me sometimes they punched holes through their walls or windows or whatever, even though it hurts them, and even though they feel stupid for doing it afterwards, and you know, sometimes their parents then take measures to pad whatever it is they punch, make it softer and less damaging for them next time. And I can ask the kid if this works, and they tell me sometimes yes, but sometimes they just then start looking for something else to punch instead, something that hasn't been made soft and will hurt their hands again. Why? They don't always know why, and it's not a good thing to punch holes through walls or doors or windows or whatever, but clearly there is a part of them that wants to do that. Clearly there is something they're getting from the experience. Tyler Durden has his answer for why, though. He knows exactly what he thinks it is, and he's not going to entertain any other ideas. He's going to make damn sure you hear his viewpoint with a charisma and a directorial brilliance that does make it all quite compelling, especially when you're young or you're vulnerable or you're feeling a lot of rage yourself. He says that this is how men are meant to be. Angry, destructive, primal. Men aren't supposed to look perfect or manicured or be concerned with self-improvement and responsibility. He says self-improvement is masturbation, but self-destruction, imperfection, to be full of scars and bloodied lips and cracked teeth, free to be an animal rather than restrained by social expectations, forced into a suit and tie or judged by what Calvin Klein or Hugo Boss or whatever other brand presses them to be. Forget all of that. Forget being heroic athletes and rock gods. We were raised to aspire to be that, but it never happened. No one made us into these wonderful, perfect, unattainable celebrities, so screw it. I don't want that. I want to be the complete reverse. Although this is, of course, all said by a man who looks like Brad Pitt and who clearly spends a great deal of time styling and gelling his hair. It's easy to mistake aggression with power and strength. It's easy to mistake the freedom to follow your basest impulses as freedom itself. But what we end up here with is essentially a group of lonely men who tell themselves they are free whilst all shaving their heads, all being stripped of their names, and are still just as judged by the expectations of manliness. Only it's a slightly different idea of what manliness is. You know, instead of expected to wear a tie and be responsible, they're expected to be shirtless and raging. All of the references to castration make it pretty clear what they think of men who don't conform to their new expectations. Tyler's big rebellion against consumerism and social expectations of masculinity isn't freedom, because they are now forced to conform to the opposites of consumerism and those social expectations. It's technically the same thing, just a different aesthetic. It feels free because there is an outlet for aggression, and you tell yourself it's rebellion, and you do crazy things like vandalize cars and burn faces into buildings, and you tell yourselves that all means something and will lead to some great revolution somehow, rather than it just being things you're doing because it feels kinda good. But the film is not shy about the parallels it makes, for example, between the negative way they talk about franchises and that kind of corporate consumerism.
When deep space exploration ramps up, it'll be the corporations that name everything Planet Starbucks.
Only to later describe the growing Fight Club itself as a franchise.
Planet Tyler. Tyler had been busy setting up franchises all over the country.
The narrator's own imagining of freedom from social restraints and freedom from what other people think of him is to get in their face about it. Make it as overtly obvious as he can that he does not care what they think. But of course, he does that precisely because he does actually care deep down. He cares a hell of a lot that people see him as too free to care. Look, the point was we have a film about mostly men who feel lost and angry with their lives and become addicted to chasing what feels like freedom and feels like empowerment. I suppose a kind of dopamine hit version of those aspirations, rather than really struggling to find real agency and empowerment, and ever asking themselves the question, what do I actually want from life? Yeah, that question is so absent from everyone's lips in this film. What do I as an individual actually want. To be fair, when I recorded this, I'd forgotten about this moment.
Guys, what do you wish you'd done before you died?
Paint a self-portrait.
Build a house. And you?
I don't know.
However, the example here is kind of the opposite of finding agency and direction in your life. These are more like little bucket list things than actually finding purpose. Tyler is almost certainly not going to let them pursue these, and it's more a dramatic example used to illustrate his philosophy again, rather than anything transformative to individual human beings. It feels like it's powerful to be put in this position, but there is a difference between being faced with a philosophy and living your life. The only person who is properly asked this is Raymond.
What did you want to be?
Yes, we're going to return to him shortly, but first I do need to send you out on an assignment to smash up a load of cars and paint this onto a billboard. Whoa, Anvil! Yep, they sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that sleuth of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! Let's briefly track back to the beginning of this film. The unnamed narrator feels lost and alone, emotionally repressed, kind of impotent, lacking self-confidence, hates himself for his consumerism, and most importantly, can't sleep. Why he can't sleep is not truly a question he considers, and neither does his doctor, who is pretty coldly dismissive of the narrator's struggles.
I'm in pain.
You want to see pain? Swing by First Methodist Tuesday nights. See the guys with testicular cancer.
And you know what he takes from this experience is that unless you're dying, your problems do not matter. You don't matter enough. If you're sad or troubled by problems that amount to anything less than facing your mortality, then you're weak and insignificant and pathetic. Maybe it's a leap in logic to say the narrator concludes all of that from one interaction. It's no doubt feelings he already had, but it's mostly what we do see in him, yeah. So he goes to the group meeting with a fake name, and he ends up pretending he has testicular cancer too. A, because people will actually listen when they think you're dying.
When people think you're dying, man, they really listen to you instead of just
waiting for their turn to speak.
And B, because it's now an acceptable reason to cry. Crying because sometimes people do just cry? No, that's weak, that's pathetic. Crying because you have testicular cancer? Yes, you are given a free pass because you're now not seen as a man. You have lost your testicles. That's all the narrator's unsubtle viewpoint. He doesn't view it that they're exactly free to express their sadness, it's that they've already failed as men and therefore it no longer matters if they do. That's his opinion. So he does sneer and look down on all of these men, but he also dips into their world of vulnerability once a week so that he can have an emotional release. an outlet. That feels good, before then stepping away knowing he doesn't actually have cancer, knowing he gave them a fake name. They don't know who he is not one of them. I'm still a man, really. I got my free pass to cry simply by pretending. I'll still project down onto them while still getting to walk free with a weight off my chest for a little bit. It's a really interesting mental gymnastic at work simply to allow himself to cry. It's such a good idea in this film, and we could just focus on that and discuss that a lot more. But it's not really being free to cry. It's not the narrator facing up to the social pressures or his own incredibly rigid and unattainable view of masculinity and challenging that. No, it's an impulsive, simple outlet for some of his pain for a little bit. Just enough of an outlet to enable him to sleep.
Babies don't sleep this well.
And therefore he becomes addicted, and he goes to all sorts of different group meetings every day of the week. Because that emotional release gets enough pressure off his chest to temporarily grant him sleep without all of the difficulties of really facing up to what troubles him, or having to actually connect to any of these people. They hug and they cry, and that definitely means something, but there's no way in hell the narrator's going to take it any further. Until Marla appears. Marla is a woman who does the exact same thing as the narrator, starts attending group meetings for illnesses or problems she doesn't actually have. The narrator sees her as a faker with all sorts of vicious judgments that could just as easily be describing himself. And so this bursts the narrator's bubble. Now he can't sleep again. Now he feels kind of guilty and pathetic about what he's doing. This whole plan can only work if the narrator puts on a fake name and pretends to be someone completely different for a bit and doesn't actually have to fully connect. But Marla's presence there is both a visible reminder of who he is and what he's doing, as well as her presence meaning that she knows what he's doing. He isn't just someone anonymous with a fake name now. She has a sense of who he really is. The idea of anyone knowing what he's up to, knowing who he might be, that makes him feel too exposed and a bit judged, and I think pathetic is the right word. I'm not saying he's pathetic in any of this, don't misunderstand that, but I think that's definitely how he feels about himself here. Marla breaks this setup. Now he can't cry and can't sleep, so what does he do? Well, he has an image of himself confronting her.
I'm gonna grab that little bitch Marla Singer and scream,
Marla, you liar! You big tourist! I need this! Now get out!
Grabbing Marla by the arm and telling her how very bad she is, pouring all of his own feelings of shame and humiliation onto her, but I think crucially, this shows us a side of the narrator that wants to appear dominant with women, aggressive and controlling. He's got his back up a bit, you know. Marla knowing what he's up to makes him feel exposed and weak, and so he wants to reassert his strength by having a go at her. He rehearses it, and then he tries, and then it doesn't go to plan. Marla won't take his judgment because she's her own person. She's not just an object to help the narrator feel more powerful.
I saw you practicing this.
Practicing what?
Telling me off. Is it going as well as you hoped?
He wanted to come across here as this idea of what powerful looks like to him, but it didn't work. He feels he was too weak or too lacking in confidence to manage it. What happens next? Tyler Durden appears. If the narrator himself can't do this stuff, feels he was too weak to do this stuff, weak is an interesting word we're going to come back to later on, put a pin in that, he imagines someone who can do those things, someone who is his version of a masculine ideal, down to the six-pack, the fighting, the narrator's imagination of what great sex looks like, which seems to be super aggressive. We watched this film in the cinema last Sunday for its 25th anniversary, and I think the sound effects on the sex were the loudest, most intense in the film. That is a clear point in itself. It's really interesting to look at this film and see the narrator taking a level of inspiration both from Marla and from all the group sessions he attended, and then trying to rework that into something that conforms to his ideal of masculinity and chases after that. Fight Club. you can see a lot of similarities. One of them being that it's again an emotional release. This time it's anger, because anger is more manly and acceptable. It's not a working through of the anger or doing anything with it, it's just a release before again moving on like a stranger who's anonymous, pretending you don't actually know any of the people you see in those meetings. There's 2 points here, essentially. One, yes, just a simple emotional release isn't really enough on its own to help resolve all of the narrator's difficulties and any of the other people's. The other men in the sessions for testicular cancer knew each other's names and talked openly and got to know each other and make a deeper connection. But not the narrator. Even when he starts Project Mayhem and invites people into his home, he never cares about any of them or learns anyone's names besides, of course, Bob, the one guy who did sometimes cry. Point 2 though, that doesn't mean an emotional outlet is a bad thing. Again, it's not exactly good for a kid to be punching holes in the wall, no, but there was a reason it felt necessary. Sometimes these things do explode out of us in not the most healthy ways, but that doesn't mean you should bottle them all up and repress it, you know? There is a reason Fight Club can look so appealing. People do need a release. I've talked many times about the importance of anger in videos. And in that context, Tyler isn't technically a villain. He is something the narrator imagined. He's not some evil demon that happens to possess the narrator, you know, he is him. He exists for a reason, for something in the narrator, as an outlet for that. And to an extent, this is kind of positive in the movie. The narrator does find more confidence as a result of Tyler. He is, to some loose extent, feeling freer. He literally becomes a leader. There is a reason the narrator is telling Tyler right at the end that he is grateful to him.
I'm grateful to you for everything that you've done for me.
The problem here is A, getting lost in that release itself, and B, idealizing it. It's not getting out a bit of anger so you can feel more free to get back to your life, or so you can better reflect on the anger. It's getting angry because that's how men are apparently supposed to be. That anger in itself is a really good thing to cultivate. Therefore, the anger builds. The violence. Things become more and more extreme, and then you get Project Mayhem. But initially, yeah, Tyler expresses all the things the narrator wishes he could do, but just feels too afraid or shy or weak or whatever to actually do them.
I am smart, capable, and most importantly, I'm free in all the ways that you are not.
Again, there's that word weak. We're coming back to that. He'd love to smash up cars, destroy art, and vandalise coffee shops as a big middle finger to Starbucks and all of the trappings of the consumerism lifestyle that he already hated himself for. God, that'd feel good, to just put it all there as a clear target and stick up your middle finger. To do that to your world of the condo apartments, to instead live in a grubby broken house. Write weird haikus to all your co-workers. Why? I don't know, just freak them out a bit. That'll be so fun. Can you imagine their faces when reading these? In your head, you can kind of see the appeal to a lot of that stuff. There's just one big problem here. Well, apart from all the moral implications, but one other big problem, and I think this is where we finally return to the point of this video and to Raymond. Are you ready? So, I said rather tenuously that Tyler represents all of the things the narrator wishes he could do but feels too afraid or too weak or too restrained to actually do. That's what he thinks. He's so passive throughout most of Tyler's shenanigans. Often he raises a protest, yeah, he doesn't like a lot of what Tyler wants to do, however Tyler pushes with total confidence. The narrator then gives way and he decides, actually, yeah, this was a good thing. It did make sense in a Tyler sort of way. I was just too afraid or too restrained to see it.
Have I ever let us down?
As always, I will carry you, kicking and screaming, and in the end, you will thank me.
The thing is, obviously the narrator is technically doing all of these things, and maybe how you interpret these characters could come in here. You know, is this Jungian? Is this dissociative identity disorder? I quite like an IFS viewpoint, but I've been stubbornly refusing to commit to a clear psychological interpretation in this video. Technically, it's the narrator doing this stuff because he is Tyler. But also, he's not protesting because he's too afraid or too weak or whatever other similar words he might feel about it. That's not why he's holding back. It's because, actually, deep down, he doesn't want to do those things. They feel fun, they're an outlet, they're a power fantasy, but beyond that, he still doesn't actually want to do them. He's been so caught up in feeling weak and shaming himself that he didn't realise that, so lost in the idea that a real man would do these things. If I don't want to, it's because I'm pathetic, so let's invent Tyler who can push me into this all. So caught up in that he struggled to realise what he wants. This is kind of about responsibility.
Take some responsibility.
I do. I am responsible for all of it, and I accept that.
Something he's avoided, I think, partly out of moral guilt, but also the sense of shame, the feeling he's too weak to have possibly done any of these things, and therefore depended on Tyler. But no, it was him. The more he sees just how capable he is of all of this, how unweak, how unafraid in terms of like the way he views all of this, that's what frees him to question if he actually wanted to do any of this in the first place. In taking responsibility, he finds his agency and finds the awareness to question these feelings of shame that have been driving him like a defense. Tyler has been a reaction. Let's think about that for a second. The narrator wanted the emotional release of getting to be vulnerable in a safe space, only he felt so much inner shame about his vulnerability that it took all of this anonymous approach with the justification of a near-death experience, and he couldn't let himself open up too much either. It took all of that to be able to cry at all, but then Marla shows up and suddenly he isn't anonymous anymore. He is seen for his vulnerability, and that feels so incredibly exposing and shameful and makes him feel pathetic, so he steers a hard U-turn into delusion and power fantasy and everything he can to make himself feel less weak again, lost in a sense of validation that can never fulfill him. But the narrator just wanted to connect with someone. Even when he realises he wants to stop Project Mayhem, he is still begging for Tyler to stop it at first. When no, he has to realise the gun is in his hand, not Tyler's. That's when he shoots himself in the cheek and consequently kills Tyler. Which is an odd moment that this specific interpretation doesn't quite align with. Because again, there are many other ways we could see the film, but the crucial moment for me is the narrator telling Tyler that his eyes are open.
My eyes are open.
He sees now the consequences of his actions and the reasons. After Tyler's gone, he watches the explosions without turning away. That was him. So what does the narrator want? Yeah, it's Marla. Not simply for sex or for projecting down onto. He doesn't aggressively grab her arm and shake her in this moment. He doesn't kiss her or do anything other than just hold her hand. That's what he's wanted. It's only right at the very end of this film that he finally gets it. What's this got to do with Raymond? Tyler asked him what he wanted to be, a vet. Only somehow that dream slipped by and he ended up working in a shop. Therefore, if you use the fear of death to force him back into studying so he does become a vet, that's a good thing, apparently. Well, it's that Tyler never really asks why that dream slipped away from Raymond, or even what Raymond wants to be now, only what he wanted to be at the time when he first went to college. You know, just like the narrator, maybe he didn't achieve these things not because he was too weak or too afraid or too lazy or a failure. Maybe he just didn't want that anymore. Maybe he's happy working in a shop. Maybe it's a hell of a lot less stressful than putting animals down or worrying about surgeries. Maybe he found something he cares about more, like maybe a family, and maybe he's just happy doing whatever job to pay the bills and support his kids while getting time to be with them. Or maybe he doesn't like his job, but it's a stopgap while he figures out what he does want to do with his life, which again might not be a vet anymore. Maybe that, maybe another 1,000 possibilities. But Tyler's viewpoint doesn't allow for any of those. If there's something that a little part of you wants to do and you don't do it, it's because you failed and because you're not enough of a man in his eyes. You know, when you look at it like this with the example of Raymond, it's pretty clear how simplistic all of this has been. Sometimes freedom means deciding what not to do rather than just whatever the hell your impulses scream for. It doesn't mean becoming repressed or feeling lost and without direction, no, but sometimes freedom means choosing to take on responsibilities, or to hold yourself back, or to focus on doing the things that feel most important to you, thinking on a wider scale about what that is and how you do it. Hell, doing the things that you think are right. That's empowerment. Raymond is so interesting in this film because it's in Tyler's judgment that Raymond must obviously be weak and a failure for not achieving his old career aspiration, rather than actually engaging with who Raymond could be, that you realise just how trapped Tyler and the narrator really are in their own sense of shame and the social judgments they were supposedly rebelling against. People talk a lot about toxic masculinity nowadays, so much so it's become a bit of a buzzword that puts me off the phrase. And also I think it's a word people misunderstand to mean that being masculine is bad. I think it's so easy to be made to feel weak or humiliated or worthless or like your feelings do not matter. The group sessions at the beginning of this film are positive for the narrator, but they're also not right. And I think the film is deliberately taking the mick out of them as well. They do kind of help the narrator, they definitely help him sleep, but they also leave him feeling emasculated and so exposed that when someone he feels sexually attracted to sees what he's doing, it spirals him into toxicity. So many men are afraid that masculinity is under attack, that they're supposed to become feminine and weak, or whatever the words you see them use all over the internet. That fear makes them react against that. Right or wrong, that does seem to be what a lot of men think and feel. But healthy masculinity has always been about finding deeper empowerment and agency that doesn't sabotage our connections. I don't know, I've denied myself a succinct conclusion by rambling away at the end here. However, it does make me think of therapy and how afraid any of us, not just men, can be that we're meant to sit down and cry and be super vulnerable. And obviously that's an uncomfortable thought. Sometimes that's great, yeah, sometimes that's exactly what you want to do, but no wonder people feel uneasy about the idea and see it like a threat and feel like doing that would make them weaker. I don't think that's true, but no wonder they feel it. And I know in my own work, I generally just let them take the lead on when they want to talk, when they want to play or draw or do whatever, and then finding ways to do the work through all of that. Yes, I'm working with kids, so you know I can have sword fights with them, or go outside and kick a ball around if sitting down feels too much. That is a very kid example, but I think sometimes you can't help a person find their vulnerability and find the positive within that by forcing them to do something that feels like a weakness to them. And that's what's interesting about Fight Club. To the narrator, it feels like there's only a choice between polar opposites, doing something that does kind of help him, but also to his mind feels incredibly emasculating, or losing yourself to Project Mayhem. Surely part of the problem here is when people don't feel like there's a middle ground. I don't know, I adore this film. I could easily make 10 different other videos on it with different interpretations and meanings. And this video is probably a little wayward because I feel tempted to pull in other views all the time, but this is what you're getting today. Comment your thoughts, like the video if you liked it, subscribe, support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Grace, Luke Orr, Treat You Caber, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.